and welcome to episode 90 of A Gamer Looks at 40. And before I continue, episode 90. I did not think this show would get past 40 when I was initially workshopping it, but 90 is a big number, and the big 100 is right down the pike, and if all things align, it's going to be a doozy. So hopefully you stick around for that. But for now, it is time to talk hockey. Last week, Troy Linden and Richard Hilleman joined me to talk about the early Madden days. And while I have very fond memories of those early games, they were all at my friend's house. I never owned a Madden game until I think the GameCube. So, because football was always a passing thing for me. I like football, but I'm not a super fan. I don't have any fandoms. I watch it on Sunday like everybody else, and that's it. But hockey is a different thing entirely. If you know me personally, you know hockey is my number one sport by an extremely large margin. My second podcast was in support of my beloved New Jersey Devils. The first game I saw in person was in 1993. Around my birthday, it was Hartford versus New Jersey in the old Brendan Byrne Arena. Devils win 3-1 with Craig Billington in net. I remember my first Devils jersey because it was Stéphane Richer, and I got it in 1996. Fast forward 2.5 months, he is traded to Montreal, making my jersey completely useless and irrelevant. I remember the championships. I remember playing street hockey on Eastern Parkway with Joey and his brother Steven and all these friends in West Caldwell, New Jersey. Just something out of Clerks. Suffice to say, hockey is in my blood. And the NHL series, the EA NHL series, was my escape. That was where I could role play, pretend I was Marty Brodeur, pretend I could check like Scott Stevens, and pretend I could shoot like Patrick Elias. Now, NHL series for me really started around the mid-90s, like 94, 95, and 96. 96 was the first one I ever owned personally, but I played a ton of 94 with friends. But those mid-90s EA NHL games all started with 1991's NHL Hockey on the Genesis. And much of the same team that pioneered the Madden games were responsible for hockey. But hockey was a different beast altogether. And in this episode of A Gamer Looks at 40, we are going to learn how and why. Quick note before we get started. Unfortunately, between the Madden conversation and NHL conversation, the recording software I use, or at this point now used to use because of this situation, crapped out on me and ate a lot of the interview with Troy Linden and Richard Hilleman. I had to reschedule the interview with Richard. Troy couldn't make it. So this episode is 100% Richard and I talking about the birth of the NHL series. But it's a really cool conversation. I am so sorry to Troy that we couldn't make it happen, but who knows, maybe down the line we'll do something else. Is the beauty of the internet and the beauty of doing this kind of show. You never know what story is coming up next. Time to lace up those skates, hit the ice, and really, let's not try to make Gretzky's head bleed too much as we dive into the birth of the EA NHL series with Richard Hilleman.
We'll take the face-off, the howitzer, and the deke. Give me that kick save, give me the biscuit. Give me those skaters, not those skaters. Give me the real stuff. Yeah, him. Can you dent the twine? Good. Give me the siren, give me the post, Zamboni. Give me that, and that. Not her. Yeah, him. Take that, take him, take that. Gimme the box. If it's in the game, it's in the game. NHL PA and NHL Hockey for Super NES and Sega Genesis. EA Sports. It's in the game.
Why hockey is harder than football.
Mm-hmm.
Why it's easier first. Number one is we didn't do a 3D perspective screen, which added nothing to that game. It was a good decision because people were mad at me because I didn't do that. It was like, it's dumb. It doesn't add anything and it cost me 4 frames per second. I ain't doing it.
Right.
Number one. Number two was we had less players. Got less players, game runs a little faster. So it wasn't 22, it was 12. And that's a lot better. Bad news, scroll rates were 5.5 times what they were in football because players move a lot faster. And so it was a trade-off. We fought Terry, which was being able to update the screen as fast as it could be displayed.
Right.
I would say we fought that till ship day on that game, meaning it was something where we would fall into it from time to time. And that was simply an imbalance between the speed of the simulation and the speed of the display system. That it took us a while to get that balance. There were two reasons why. One of them was we were running faster. NHL Hockey is about 25% faster in front of it. We were very proud of that. We thought it was very important. And that has a bunch of things, including optimization and some other things. But the other thing is it had to run for a long time. One of the things that was true about Madden is you think about it, that game the quote game simulation never runs for longer than about 12 seconds.
Right. Sure. It's plays.
And so did it have problems? Hell yeah. You want to know how long those problems happened? About 2 seconds at the end.
2 seconds.
Some lineman decides he's going to run to Spain. Have nothing to do with the play, but he's off screen, so you can't tell, and he only does it for 2 seconds. Am I going to fix it? Hell no. So the game was, the answer was Madden, because of that short window, we're going to open the curtains and then we're going to close the curtains again. We didn't, stuff didn't need to get fixed, and it didn't. When all of a sudden it's going to run for 22 minutes solid, which is what that game had to be able to do. It's like, suddenly when the goalie decides he's going to leave the ice, that's a problem.
Yes, it's a big problem.
I got to go fix that one. So the underlying point was that transition for us made us go fix some stuff we didn't fix before.
Interesting.
And a lot of it was it ran faster, so it pushed all of the construction of the system to its nth degree. And I'll make another allusion to a different game. So Tiger Woods 99. Was built on an iteration of the previous PGA Tour game. The PGA Tour game before, its display system worked like links. Remember links? Mm-hmm. You'd hit the ball and then it would go, run. Remember?
Yep.
And that was not real time. So I built a game where you could actually kind of fly the ball. And it meant that dude, this has got to operate like, I got to get 15 frames per second or we're not in the game.
Right.
And so he said, well, that's impossible. This thing's designed to do this. I said, A, never tell me impossible. B, it's all about how much data and how fast the system went. And we made that system run 25 times faster, and we changed the data set to be at least 200% more efficient. The combination meant you could fly the damn ball, and suddenly exactly the same code base, more or less.
Right.
Is running much, much faster because we tuned it to do that. Now, golf has the same characteristic of Madden. It's about 10 seconds, which means madness can ensue after that. We don't really care. But underlying point is, in hockey, it was extremely important. Number two is that teaching players how to be better was much less natural. Meaning Mike and Troy and a dozen people in the offices in San Diego knew enough about football to know what a wide receiver doesn't do.
Right.
That kind of stuff. They went to their first hockey game when they signed.
Ooh, wow.
So there was one ice hockey expert on that product when it was started, and you're looking at it.
Yeah,
I still played. So for that game, it was way more important that I explain what the hell's going on. So, for instance, and this is going to be just an example.
Sure.
One of the things we learned early on was that if I possessed the puck and I just skated it straight at the goalie, that the defenseman would back right into him. I mean, I could drive him right into the goalie, and in turn, what he would do is fumble the goalie up and make it easy to score. And it would work like every time. So I said, well, let me tell you what happens in hockey practice. You do that once and two things happen. Number one is the coach yells at you to high fucking heaven. But number two is the next time you come back close, goalie hits you in the back of the head with his stick. And it's much bigger and much heavier than anybody else on the ice. Guess what? Happens about twice. You don't do that no more.
You don't do it anymore. Nope. Don't.
You may go to the corner. You may go to the corner, but you ain't chasing it.
But
So the underlying point there was, what do you do to stop that? Was what the coach tells you is count the numbers. How many people do you see in front of you of each color? If the numbers are even, step up, which means take him at the blue line. Don't let him walk all the way in. Make that entrance of the blue line difficult for him, difficult for his teammates. If you have the numbers, use your numbers. And so for me, as a concept, I could explain that concept. Jim, if at this decision point, and this is always every time you cross the blue line, defensive players are making a decision about what do they do next there. If you are the defensive player, number one, count the numbers. Number two, if you got the numbers, step up. And it made a world of difference. He literally, it was like in one of those Thursday to Thursday iterations, that it went away. And it was simply because Jim understood the concept, and I framed it in a decision-making context. And stepping up simply means make contact with the player. Just means make contact. And in the context of our game, there's not a lot of stick dynamics or technique or any of that stuff. It's like, did contact occur? And so for purposes of our game, we did that all over the place. We did it on face-offs. We did it all over the place. And what it meant was that those long-term behaviors were rule-based. And so,
interesting.
More than Madden, NHL is a rule-based system because it has to run for longer iterations. Because I can't do these little staged events and maintain any continuity over an extended period of time. That doesn't mean that we didn't break the glass or have Gretzky bleed or whatever it was. The cool thing of the time. And those were little staged moments that Jim was happy to do that kind of stuff because he could still drive it out of his system. But the underlying point there was that hockey, because it's a flow game, that's the description I've used for basketball and soccer.
Yep.
Because it's a flow game, you can't hide your sins. And as a result, those games have to be more tuned because they're more prone to exploits too, which is one of the things we always think about. All of these games as single player is, how do I break the game? How do I use Randy Moss? How do I use Randall Cunningham? How do I use Herschel Walker? Or whoever the thing was at the time.
In NHL, how do I kind of toe drag across the crease and pop it in?
Yeah, Jeremy Roenick. Yeah, Jeremy Roenick.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
No, it's fine.
So Jeremy Roenick is a great example of how the ratings just screw you up. So the interesting thing is the year Jeremy Roenick had that great year, you want to know what everybody else on the Chicago Blackhawks did? Diddly squat. Nobody else did crap that year. Doug Wilson was their leading scorer as a defenseman. That happens like, you and I both know, that happens like once every 10 years. Among 32 teams. So there's 320 opportunities, happens once. That's lower than 1%. So Jeremy Roenick on that team was all of the talent. I mean, not just a little of it, all of the talent. And as a result, we kind of piled the ratings on him and turned everybody else on. Well, it turns out one unstoppable character is enough.
Breaks the cake.
And we would play the game much straighter than most people would when we would test it.
Totally,
Stuff like that would happen. And it's like they don't understand that was the byproduct of the Blackhawks suck. And I don't know what to do about that. So 2 stories that you'll like, and then maybe we'll get you out of here early. So number one was NHL hockey wasn't supposed to be NHL hockey.
Interesting. Oh wow. Okay.
So we finished Madden. We had this list of 24 things on the whiteboard that were our to-do list that were above the line, meaning they were in the first product we shipped. And literally before that product has arrived at retail, we have fixed all that stuff and it's done. So they come to say, I come to get it approved. I said, and it's done now. And they go, what do you mean it's done now? I said, well, we kind of know what we need to do, but I can't ship it yet. I really can't finish it because I don't even know who's on the teams next year yet. Or how it's going to come out this year. And actually we did end up having to go in and do a code tweak because there was the first iteration of the run and shoot came out that year and we just didn't have it. So I had to figure out how to put something that reflected the run and shoot in there. We did some plays and it had to change the wide receiver behavior because it had a read, which was new.
Right.
So at that particular point in time, we had to make that change. But the underlying point was we finished John Madden football, I don't know, September 1st, the first one. I know because I went on vacation and Trip tracked me down on a different story for a different day. But when I came back, basically, that list had been done, and I just had to go through and tune it and iterate it, find any of the bugs with it. And so by the time I went in to get John Madden 2 approved, it was actually kind of done other than the stuff I had to do.
Like
so I said, we got time to do something else. And so Park Place wants to do another game. And it was like, cool, great. Just like, first of all, I come in and I said, it's done already. This is like the best news ever in their life. Our biggest hit. And we could have another one before next year. And next year's is already done.
That's awesome.
Where's the camera?
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's gotta be a game. Good for us. Good for us.
Yes.
Some of that is luck and there's a lot of things to that.
Sure.
They really, really, Troy and Mike, really, 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 really wanted to do a tennis game. Okay. I don't know if you heard this before, but before I worked for Electronic Arts, I lived in Las Vegas. And Las Vegas, when I lived there, was not a terribly large town. So, I pumped gas for Dean Martin. I did all kinds of stuff that would be in a normal place, not very normal. But a part of that was that I would go race go-karts, and so would Andre Agassi. And it had to do with a deal at Caesar's Palace at the time. And so as a net result, they said, we want to do a tennis game. It's like, well, I'll get Andre. So I start the process of trying to get hold of Andre, and I essentially have made the preliminary things. It's going to be a pain, because he was challenging at that time. But it's what we want to do. So I go in and through our review process, Electronic Arts review process, you come in and it's a bunch of things. Show me how you're going to sell it, how you're going to make it, how much money you're going to make, a bunch of that kind of stuff. As a process, I had the reputation of being the master of the process because I'd come in with stuff that was buttoned down technically and buttoned down financially, an unusual combination. And so, as a result, in 2.5, 3, 4 years and probably 100 tries, I had never failed to pass. It would have been like, just write those in ink. So I come in with tennis, and Larry Probst, I think he's the president by then. If not, he's the VP of sales. Says, I ain't fucking doing tennis. Wow. He may not have said effing, but he meant it.
He meant it, yeah.
He meant it. He says, I've been at Activision, and we tried to do 3 different tennis games, and I didn't make forecast on one of them. Not one. I don't believe in tennis games. I failed to bring up Pong at the time. In retrospect, I go, I had a really good cross argument, and I effed it all up. But anyway, the net effect of the conversation was, he says, go make a hockey game. It's what you want to make anyway.
Ooh, okay.
So there's a point in time where if your whole goal here is to get something approved, and they're already telling you, look, just go do this and we'll approve it, you kind of want to do that anyway. I don't think tennis is all that great. I never played it. It's not my kind of sport. I mean, sure. I've been on a tennis court with a racket in my hand. I don't consider myself a tennis player. Anyway, any of those things being true. So I wasn't a hard sell with me personally.
Sure.
And when I went to them, they didn't actually care. They really didn't. And so I went out and we did the licensing for it, which is a story for another day that has ramifications for years down the pike in that business.
Sure.
But we went out and made that game, and I was never happier to make it. And a couple of the reasons why, and I think maybe we had that conversation before, is I'm pretty sure that the very first ice hockey game that Austin and Matthews ever played was on a video screen. I would bet one of my cars on it. And I'm pretty sure I know which one it is. So, from my perspective, as somebody who loved ice hockey, and ice hockey was definitely the poor stepchild of the 4 U.S. majors at the time.
It still is to a point,
Still is to a point. But nobody looks down its nose at hockey like they did in that era anymore.
No, correct.
Because it's been pretty innovative in lots of ways. And I would say from a technology standpoint and its ability to grasp with both hands innovation, it's the leader. Meaning it's done more new stuff. It was the first of the majors to have a streaming package. People even forget. They've had one for 11 years. That's forever. That's forever. I mean, literally the big brands in streaming that exist today, ESPN didn't have a streaming package when they started. So, other than maybe the PGA Tour, by the way, who's been extremely innovative in this place, and essentially everything you see that MLB does great, it's because PGA Tour does it for them. But my only point here is that hockey has done a lot of change, and the boss is currently absolutely the reason. Meaning, Batman has been a great leader for that organization. Any other sport that had that organization would have been blessed. And baseball would be so much better off. They're so lucky they didn't lose it. So anyway, I can't say enough about it. But the underlying point there was that hockey happened kind of in spite of everybody. And so this is your next story. I grew up in Minneapolis before Las Vegas. Means I'm a North Star fan. Remember what the Stanley Cup Finals were in 1990?
I do not.
Pittsburgh Penguins, Minnesota North Stars.
Ah, okay.
So we have finished the game. It's not in ROM. It's not shipped yet. But I can't remember whose idea it is, but they decide we should go to the game and set up kiosks and let people play the game there. So they decide to go to Minneapolis. Bummer. My parents live there. It's like complete bummer for me. Literally, I go stay with my parents the entire time I'm there. So we go to the game, and I set my stuff up. And what happens, of course, is the minute the game starts, everybody leaves because I'm off watching the game. By the way, this is one of the games where Mario scored 5 goals. So I did, but it was against my team. So it was one of those things. No, I probably got to see 20 minutes of the game, but that doesn't matter.
Sure.
So it's like between second and third period, I'm out in the lobby with my stuff because otherwise it'll walk off. So somebody has to be there. It's not me. It's my turn, and the other person who's there is now off watching the game. So these 2 guys come up, and I don't know who either of them is, but they start playing this game. And dude, they are loud. I can't hear the crowd over them. The crowd from the Stanley Cup Final. I can't. These guys are so loud, and they are yelling at each other, and they're talking bad to each other.
Oh, that's so good.
It's like this is the best thing ever. And so I come over. I said, "I'm so glad you like it." And he goes, "Hi, my name's Neil Smith. This is Neil Smith, general manager of the New York Rangers. Been GM for about 6 months or something like that.
Yeah.
And his traveling buddy, which is a correspondent for the New York Post, a sports correspondent for the New York Post. When they travel together, they have a suitcase that has a rod hockey game in it. And they play rod hockey till all hours of the evening.
I love that.
And they drink and they play rod hockey and have the best time.
That's great.
And if you remember Neil in this era, Neil's like 29. He's like really young.
Yeah.
It's so better than the girls, better than many other things I could think of.
Sure.
He's like, I have to have one of these now. I said, okay, I only have these 2. You can't have these 2. Let me explain why. I said, but give me your card and we'll figure it out. So what I did was I contacted my person at the NHL and I said, I have had a request from one of the teams to do an approval review.
Ooh, an approval review.
I sent him the card, and I had my lady who worked for the NHL send it to him at the time. So what happened was I didn't go over her head, but Neil got to feel good, and he sent me a picture, a photograph, hand printed, of him and this guy sitting in some hotel room playing on their hotel television, playing this cartridge with a white paper label that was typed on in some place in New York City. And so for me, the great part about that was not only did the people in the NHL guys like it, they liked it exactly the way I wanted it to be liked, which is being a replacement for rod hockey. That would have been my dream come true. As a game designer, I want to build the best on the ice hockey game possible. Rod hockey was the gold standard at that time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And for these guys, it was a clear wipeout. And they were pretty snobby. This is like, the best wine drinkers liking your wine. So
that's so cool.
To me, that was great about it. I never talked to Neil again, ever. It was one of those things where it's like, okay, working for that guy. And it was one of those things where I think the player reaction to NHL was even better than it was for Madden out of the box, meaning the players who played it, they were fanatical and they were, very communicative about it. You go look at 1990 and 91, 92 interviews with these guys, and they talk about, I pulled out my video game moves way before anybody said that about Madden.
That's so cool.
So take a look at it. But I would make the case that the hockey guys actually grasped it with both hands faster than the football guys do. Now, of course, there are teams like Denver that have a play called the Madden play, which has to do with how you run out the clock at the end of a game. And I'm just like, John didn't invent that. Some kid in Hoboken, New Jersey did, and it spread outside the country. It wasn't John. That was crowdsourced, if ever there was something crowdsourced.
Yeah.
So anyway, those are I think the underlying things I would say. Is number one is hockey evolved the way it did because it was a system. It was much more difficult to build. The underlying code integrity and what it does is much more sophisticated in some ways than what Madden did in that same era. A. B, that it's great because it was iterated. And by the time we did hockey, it was incredibly fast iteration because the system was done the day we started, essentially.
So interesting.
And then finally, that I believe it was adopted by the real opinion leaders of the sport faster than we could blink our eyes. And I don't think we had much of anything to do with that. I think that had to do with the fact we built a game they recognized.
Just want to send a hearty thank you to my wonderful patrons for their financial support and listenership, because without them, this show is not possible. Starting off with Terry Kinnair, Greg Seward of the Player One podcast and Generation 16 series of videos, Games with Coffee, The Let's Play Princess, Theodore LaBarbera, BT Goebbels, Tim Knowles of The Elitist, Julian of Nerds Without Pants, Seth Sergel of the All End podcast, and finally the wonderful new dad himself, Pete Harney. If you like what you're listening to and want to support the show financially, mosey on down to patreon.com/agamerlooksit440. Check out the tiers, and if anything appeals to your spirit of generosity, sign up today. Yeah, and I think one of the big successes of those early NHL games, even now, but especially those early ones, they were easy enough to just pick up and play, but they felt like hockey. And again, I played hockey as well.
They were great video games.
Yes.
That happened to be about hockey, and if you played them, at the end, you understood the game.
And it didn't take long to figure out, right? And even simple things like passing to the point and on power plays, trying to,
or running your guys around, to hit people. Yep. Well, defensively, if you go running around trying to hit people, I'm going to pick you apart.
You can't do that.
You can't do that. And you also learn fighting doesn't always work out. That was a game where it's like if you picked the fight and you got the extra two, that usually you got punished for that mistake. Yeah. Power play rates were pretty high in that game.
It's amazing to me because I still play it. I still play it on occasion, and especially like 94 and some of the slightly later ones that I grew up with personally. Yep. And I'm amazed how I can get a stick in the lane, in a passing lane, and disrupt the play. And that's crazy for that era. Like, it's so sophisticated. And I think the biggest success of NHL, again, is it feels so good in your hands. It plays so beautifully. And you really disappear into it. Like, I've played full seasons. I remember lots of time spent in an NHL series. And boy, it was a compliment to my fandom. It really was. I play as the Devils. I would do a Devil season. Every year I would do a Devil season. Even when they stunk. Even when they were bad in the game. I had to. I still do. I can't play as anybody else. Just feels weird. To have Craig Billington and Terrarian net, it's weird.
For all the teams that I ever worked on, for all the games of this style I ever worked on, there was always my last test case, which is I would build whatever my all-star team was. Mm-hmm. And then just try and see how out of whack it would be. But, well, it would usually tell me what was going to be exploitable in the game.
Sure.
But yeah, look, I appreciate that. I think I told you at the start of this that the real difference between the sports games we built before this and sports games we built after Madden was that they were great in your hands first, and that the rest of the behavior in the system we cared about, but if it couldn't deliver 16 frames per second, it's like, not really important.
It's not going to feel as smooth as hockey is. Yeah. Hockey,
and that number now is probably 60 for most people. Good for them.
Sure.
So,
I'll take my 16 frame. And I think another thing too that I like about NHL, I've mentioned this in other conversation with other people, is that like hitting and collision feels very real. And I think after having this conversation, it's probably due to that 16 frames where it feels crunchy. A hit delivers. Again, that's the beautiful thing about it. I'm assuming that's just after this conversation. It's probably because of that slower frame rate. You have more weight to hits than if it's a 60 frames per second. People kind of
it's still a systemic. I mean, it's a systemic game.
It's a system, yeah.
So it's a physics interaction. But when you have 16 frames, I can simply show you I have more frames to show you the ragdoll. That's about it. So the guy you would see the acceleration. The other thing is it's ice, by the way. So when I would hit you down, you hit the ice, you'd slide fast before you slide slow. So, if I hit a guy full blast in Madden, you'd fall over.
Right.
If I hit a guy full blast in NHL, I knock him a line. I knock him from the red line to the blue line. And so the combination of the higher frame rate and the fact that simply the friction physics of the game mean that the feedback's going to be longer. The two things meant that you just had more chance to see it. Right. I think sound was pretty important too. Rob Hubbard's
the sound
design had a lot to do with delivering the goods. Some of it is in Madden. We've made every collision sound. Well, it's like 11 at one time,
right?
or 10, and so it sounds like
right.
where a hit in hockey was like smack. It was. It didn't get smeared away. It wasn't lost in reverb. It wasn't 17 other sounds that you were hearing. Same thing with the puck hitting the boards or the slap shot sounds. All of those, as a piece of staging, they had space. So it just has to do with the nature of the game. But Rob did, by the time I think Rob had more fun on NHL than he did on Madden. There just was a limitation of what you could get done within the constraints of that many voices in Madden. But by comparison, I know he and I spent time talking about how much reverb you put in.
Sure.
So when you're arguing, when you're having those kind of conversations, you're having fun as a sound designer.
Absolutely. And I think what's also cool about NHL is that all the little grace notes, it's all the little, for example, the audience is expressive. The goalies will tap their sticks in frustration, or when they get scored upon. There's all of these lovely little, again, I call them grace notes that really
there
fleshes
are,
out.
by the way, real people within that audience too, but you can ask Troy about it.
That's pretty cool. I love that. I feel, again, that's the big success of it. And again, not to turn this into a praise fest, because again, I adore this game and I'm so glad I'm having this conversation, but that's another piece of the puzzle for me. Sound is a big deal, and of course play, but boy, oh boy, all those little touches just make it feel so real and authentic. And I think the touches were put in the right place. The time was spent in the right place, and knowing that you were such a big fan of hockey makes perfect sense. Like, it sounds like you understood what made experiencing a game of hockey, like playing and experiencing it, fun and cool.
And one of the other things we had to simply do was you design around the package. So the back of the package would have 6 screenshots on it, and you're trying to make sure your game has 6 moments that play well on those screenshots. So the original Madden didn't really have that many. But by the time we did NHL, if you look, I think we got 4 on the back of that. One of which shows a menu that shows that we got all the teams. And then a few different things happening, including a guy getting yard sailed out. So what I think was true is by the time we made NHL, we had made a couple of things that we wanted to do in the first game that had. So for instance, we had the cart in Madden that showed up in the second year that would come out for the injured player. And, being on defense and delivering a blow that requires the cart was kind of an achievement, and it made the back. In retrospect, I'm going, is that a good thing? I don't know. Anyway, but breaking the glass in NHL was one of those moments that we said, what are the kinds of moments that are like breaking the backboard, and that happen once every 25 games, maybe. But when they do, everybody talks about it the next day.
Yeah.
So we tried to really make sure we had most of those, and there were a couple things that season that I think drove us to do some stuff. And the Gretzky bleeding on the ice that Vince Vaughn liked so much later. I think that's I think that's the second one. But that's an example of one of those moments that we knew we needed to build those moments that at that time were on the back of the package, and later by '93 had to be able to play on television. And so those moments that you described, it's not by accident. To be honest, marketing people came over and twisted my arm. not in a bad way, but simply expressed why it was important. And then it was my job to make them as authentic as possible. And so the fact that you didn't see them as marketing exploitation means I did my job correctly for a change.
The job was done well. And I will say that every time I break or have broken the glass in NHL, the replay goes on and I have to see it again. I have to play it 3 times because it is so cool. But how is the replay handled? Because I can't, it sounds like to me, that's a lot of.
No, it comes out of the system. No, it comes out of the system.
Okay. Yeah.
So what the system is if you record the stream of joystick inputs, run the clock in the system back to the same point, put those inputs, and then press play again, you'll get the same outcome. Everything is exactly the same. So it's you reset it to the same random number generator seed, and then feed it essentially a recorded stream of those joysticks. And so we kept a buffer of those joystick events, and that in turn would be then fed back into the system to make the instant replay system work. We used it a lot for debugging, because it meant that we could, if we did a play and left tackle went to St. Louis while we were in Chicago for some reason, or there are 14 players on the screen, I got to be able to show you that. So the iteration, the bug, the process of communicating with Jim for me was about once a week I'd produce a VHS videotape that had 25 of those events that I had edited, that had been captured from my play. I recorded every time to VHS, well, actually to 8mm in my case, so I could edit it easier. But I recorded to 8mm, and then I would edit down just relatively simple sequence editor, cut that to VHS, put it in an envelope, and FedEx it to Jim on Tuesday. I think that was the method. Meaning I would get a new thing on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, work on it. Tuesday, crap, it was going to go out. It goes to Jim. He gets it Wednesday. Usually for him, I've already talked to him about what he's going to get, so the tape is only for the 2 things he can't. What the hell are you talking about? So,
right.
And sometimes there would be, in those earlier versions, there would be data on the screen, 2 numbers that were useful to him.
Right, of course.
But the underlying point was that process was data rich for him. Meaning it wasn't because of the nature of the system. The more I could supply him systems information, and I think there was a period of time, not in the first 2 versions, but later on, where we could even save that buffer off so we could share it with them for finding bugs. So I'm sure that's how it works today, by the way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense that it would be used as a QA kind of thing as well. That actually makes perfect sense. With our last few minutes, I'd love to just chat with you very quickly kind of about the legacy of the series. And, you've heard me glowing about it. And obviously, if you read any, top 5, top 10 list online of sports games, NHL 94 is usually on there, or one of the early NHL games is on there. And it's usually the early ones, right? It's not the late ones, not 10 or 12.
Cartridge ones.
Yeah, it's those early ones.
Freestone.
How does that make you feel when you think back about that and the legacy this game has and that road you've taken and how this is persistent? I mean, they're still playing online versions of this, and there's leagues and the movies, right? Like, wow, how does that make you feel when you think about it in that way?
Like it isn't me.
Interesting. Yeah, fair.
I mean, I think that's what most people feel about this stuff.
Sure.
I think I told you I grew up in Minneapolis. One of the things that I did was I grew up in the late 70s, early 80s there. So that music scene that emerged there, I kind of grew up in that before I moved. And as a result, there are parts of that are really interesting to me. The Replacements are an example. I don't know how much you know about the Replacements. Mm-hmm. But if you hear Westerberg interviewed, he's like, it doesn't even feel like it was me. He goes, it's like something I read in a Cream magazine. I have almost no personal connection with that experience.
So interesting, yeah.
And I think that's somewhat similar to me. Now, I love when people come and tell me that it's how much they love it and how much it meant to them. And I have a story to probably punctuate that in a moment. But
okay.
and I think that's great. But my personal experience with it is, it looks like that I had an effect on ice hockey play in North America, much beyond anything I could have ever imagined. Even if I had played at some, I played AAA a long time, but even if I've been actually really good. And so what's interesting about that is I would have never, the 14 or 15-year-old of me would have never imagined that's possible. And so I can't say I had a vision or a plan for that. I just kind of woke up one day and was there. And, so for me, I feel about it kind of the same way. For a long time, for almost 20 years, I used to go watch people line up to buy John Madden football at Toys R Us on whatever that Thursday night was, just because I couldn't believe it. It was like,
that's cool.
This is like unbelievable. So the biggest thing about it is the endurance. Both of those games have run for 30 years. Like, that's unfathomable. I mean,
it's crazy.
It's, 4 or 5 times what anybody would ever expect. That I think is great. I think the effect that maybe I had on hockey, and that if there's an Austin Matthews, maybe there wouldn't have been without him. I think it's a reasonable question.
Sure, sure it is. Exposure is everything, right?
Yeah, and I think that hockey is better off for Austin Matthews.
Yes.
And the question is, would we have had Austin Matthews without hockey really purposely reaching outside of its comfort zone?
Yep.
It coincided with Gretzky. I mean, almost exactly coincides with Gretzky's move too. Oh, by the way. But I think that outreach, hockey is in the healthy state it's in today, in a lot of warm weather markets, in my judgment, because it's no longer a quote unquote winter sport. It's just a sport.
Right. And I grew up in northern New Jersey playing street hockey every week with friends and such. And when it was too cold out to play hockey on the street, we were playing hockey on the TV. That's what we were doing.
Or a mini stick. You were playing mini stick
please.
Until you broke something, and then mom said no more mini stick.
Then that was it. Then you're done. But I will tell you from personal experience, it was one of those games that really helped me become a hockey fan. I remember the date and game, my first hockey game, and I remember also going back to my friend's house and playing one of the NHL games on his Genesis. That was at a sleepover. It was after my first Devils game, Devils Hartford. It was December 28th, I'm pretty confident, of 93. And Devils won 3-1 at the old Brendan Byrne. And then at a sleepover, and then we played it, and then we just played Devils Hartford.
Till morning.
Till like 3 a.m. with my best friend's dad going, "Boys, could you go to sleep?" So listen, it's an impactful game, and it's just, I think it's proof that games, at the very end of the day, games are meant to be played. They have to feel good in your hands. And whether it's 40 years old or 2 years old, that's, I think, the most impactful thing. So
wow. All right, here's your last story. And to me, I think it's the point. I think sports is important. I think professional sports is very interesting. I think, what soap operas would guys have without the sports section, which is 80% that isn't actually sports. So, it's an important part of American culture, important part of world culture, from what I can tell. And I think that's great. And I think our ability to connect, we invited jocks to the nerd party. Shame on me, but that's what I did. And so as a result, I widened the world of video games, and I think we're better off with that. I think even Fortnite today, the notion of esports wasn't possible until that cross was made, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
That's all great. At the end of the day, though, the stuff that I always think, you've seen Field of Dreams, right?
Yes.
Yeah, you got one of those behind you that this will lead nicely into. To me, the entire point of Field of Dreams is not the guys coming out of the cornfield in the game they play. It is the fact that Kevin Costner's character gets to play catch with his father. If you remember, that's really the end of the movie. And that is what the reward is that he's after. When I was, 28, I played and still do sometimes, played in a pickup game called the Roosters, 6 a.m. Sunday morning. Not my favorite time to play hockey, but I showed up in our locker room and I sat down, and the goalie, you'll get why this is a big deal, grabs his equipment, puts it all back in the bag, and drags it over so he can sit next to me. Now, goalies don't do that crap. They put their shit down and it doesn't move anymore. Why? Because they got too much.
I played goal. That's what I do. So, yes.
Yeah. So, and this is my spot in the locker room. I ain't moving.
That's it.
You move.
Nope.
And Yeah, so I've been
Yes.
been a third string goalie. I've played the job. I have wins. I've
Yeah,
played in the
okay.
playoff game. I've done all that stuff.
Nice. Okay.
But you know, I'm best being the guy who we need somebody to put on the gear. Get Rich because he's done it before. That is,
Sure. Yep.
I kind of can't screw that up. You know what I mean?
Fair.
Fair. So rather, if I'm sitting at the end and gear, then people have different expectations. So anyway, but he comes over to sit down next to me, and this is kind of the second year of NHL. And he goes, I was playing with my son last night, and he keeps coming in and roofing it on me. He does this deep turn into the corner, it comes around, and he roofs, and I can't stop it. He says, how do you stop it? I said, that's an exploit. I said, the only way we found it is you got to take control of that defenseman and make sure your guy can't come out of the corner. Because once he picks up speed, the goalie will never stop that shot, and that's just a bug of the goalie. You could back the goalie into the goal, and you would leave that inner up corner open. We fixed it later. What was very clear at the end of this conversation was that he and his son were playing this like every day, and that he said out loud, he says, I could never play catch with my son, but I can do this with him. This has become the thing that I do with my son. By the way, his son came out and played with us too. But for him, playing NHL hockey had become playing catch in the backyard, had become that moment from Field of Greens. I think when I heard that, I felt like we'd actually really accomplished what we were supposed to. It's great to impact the sport, but at the end of the day, what you really want to be is you want to be a part of one of those memories, because those are the ones that matter. So hopefully, my guess in your case is probably Mario Kart, which is a fine choice, but you have one of those kind of moments with your kids.
I do. Absolutely.
And they're the ones that matter later, more than Mario scoring 5 goals. I think Mario would agree with me, by the way. And so,
I think so too. I think so too.
So I think that for me, that was us at our absolute best in the game, was when we had that kind of effect on an audience, when we turn into 2 baseball gloves in a baseball between a father and their son, or a mother and their son, or a mother and their daughter. I don't really care.
Yep.
The point is we become that institutional memory that's a part of their lives for 40 years, 50 years. That's, as an artist, that's all you ever want in life.
Thank you so much for listening to this edition of A Gamer Looks at 40. If you enjoyed this episode, check me out on Twitter at AGamerLooksAt4040. In the bio, there's a link tree that takes you to all the everything I have on offer for my wonderful, wonderful listeners. Thanks again to both Richard and to Troy for taking some time to talk about the old days of EA, the inspirations and the technology and the techniques and all the amazing stories about those early days. These games are formative, they're legendary, and video games as a whole are better because they exist. Many thanks to my pals P. Harney and Kev from the Discord for helping cut up the interviews. Many thanks to my patrons once again, and thanks to you for listening to this edition of A Gamer Looks at 40. Without your listening, this show doesn't mean all that much at all. Until next time, just be kind to yourselves and each other.